It was the look in his eyes that hinted at something deeper. For decades, the world had seen Magic Johnson as the man with the winning smile, the Showtime grin that lit up arenas and hearts alike. But that day, when he sat down for an exclusive interview, there was something different. "There's one reason I left the game that I've never shared," he said quietly. It wasn't what everyone thought. The statement echoed across headlines. Speculation exploded. Hadn't the world already heard the whole story? But Magic had never really let anyone all the way in. Not until now. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the icons you thought you knew. He was the golden boy of basketball, the symbol of charisma and dominance, a 5-time NBA champion with the Los Angeles Lakers, and a global ambassador for the game. Magic Johnson wasn't just great, he was magnetic. Fans loved him. The league needed him. And in the summer of 1991, he was still at the top of his game. That's what made it all so shocking. On November 7th, 1991, Magic stood behind a podium and announced his immediate retirement from the NBA. "Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today," he said. The press room fell silent. The world held its breath. He smiled through it, assured the public he was okay, he would live, he would fight, he would educate, and he did. But privately, behind the lights and the microphones, behind the speeches and campaigns, a storm had already begun brewing. There was fear, yes. There was shame, guilt, disbelief, all natural, all expected. But there was also something more, something he never voiced. Cookie, his wife, saw the change immediately. She always had a way of seeing through the mask. She had married a legend, yes, but more importantly, she had married a man, one who beneath the applause was unraveling. At the time of the announcement, Cookie was pregnant with their first son. And though she stood beside him on that historic day, the truth is their foundation was cracking. She would later say, "We weren't just fighting a virus. We were fighting silence." Magic had always been open with the media. He knew how to charm, how to answer questions with ease. But when it came to Cookie, to his own household, there were moments of hesitation. Times he pulled away. Nights he stayed up alone, staring at the ceiling, as if waiting for something to make sense. To the world, he was courageous. To himself, he was conflicted. In the months that followed, Magic embarked on an entirely new mission, spreading awareness, advocating for those living with HIV, fighting stigma with every ounce of energy he once poured into the game. And he was brilliant at it. His presence helped change perceptions. His visibility saved lives. Still, something lingered. There was a choice he had made, a moment in time just before the announcement. Something he hadn't shared with Cookie or anyone else. Something that still weighed on him, even as he smiled for the cameras, even as he told the world he had nothing to hide. That truth would remain buried for decades, until now. The silence in their home was louder than the applause outside. In the early 90s, after the announcement, Magic Johnson became a global voice, a symbol of resilience. But behind closed doors, he struggled with a weight that advocacy couldn't lift. There were nights when he sat on the edge of the bed, head in hands, long after Cookie had fallen asleep. The bedroom, once filled with laughter and casual intimacy, had become a quiet battlefield. No arguments. Just distance. The public saw him on talk shows, in classrooms, at hospitals, a man with purpose educating the world about HIV. What they didn't see was the conflict eating away at him. He wasn't just carrying a diagnosis, he was carrying secrets. In private, Cookie asked questions gently, not the ones everyone else asked, not about symptoms or survival rates. Her questions were personal. How are you sleeping? What are you afraid of? Is there anything else I should know? Magic answered with half smiles and vague reassurances. He wasn't lying, not exactly, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. Cookie began to notice the signs. Not just physical exhaustion, but something more subtle. Hesitation, guilt. She recalled one moment vividly. He stood in front of the mirror, tying his tie before a press event, and paused mid-motion. His eyes locked with hers in the reflection. And for a brief second, he looked like a man preparing for a trial, not a speech. Later, she asked what was wrong. He said he was tired. That was all. But she knew. She didn't push, not then. Their son had just been born. The joy of new life should have been healing. Instead, it amplified the tension. Cookie was raising a child with a man she loved, a man who, despite everything, still felt unreachable. At one point, she confided in her sister. "I think he's hiding something," she whispered, "but I don't know what and I don't know why." What Magic feared most wasn't public judgment. He had faced that head-on. It wasn't death either. By now his health was stable thanks to early treatment. No, what he feared most was losing the one person who stood by him when everything fell apart. But how could he tell her? How could he say that his departure from basketball wasn't just a decision for health? It was also an escape from a truth he couldn't bear to speak aloud. The weight of that unspoken moment began to seep into everything. Interviews became mechanical. Smiles faded quicker. Cookie, too, began to feel the strain. She had built a life of love and loyalty, but even she had limits. Trust wasn't about public unity. It was about the private spaces, the ones no one else saw. And then, one evening, after yet another event where Magic smiled for the cameras and Cookie stood quietly nearby, he turned to her in the car. His voice trembled. "There's something I never told you," he said. Cookie didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, steady and waiting. Magic hesitated, then stopped. "Not yet," he said softly. "Just not yet." Cookie turned away, her silence no longer gentle. The drive home was long, and that night they didn't speak at all. He had just delayed the inevitable, and that secret, still buried, was growing heavier by the day. It came one rainy afternoon, quiet and unplanned. They were at home, alone, the house was still. Cookie had just returned from a walk, her coat damp, her mind elsewhere. When she stepped into the living room, Magic was sitting in silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. She knew. Whatever he had been holding back was finally about to surface. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cookie didn't sit. She didn't speak. She just waited. And then it spilled out. The decision he made before the press conference in the days of chaos and fear. He hadn't just chosen to leave the game because of his diagnosis. He had panicked. In those final weeks, he had a moment of weakness, an encounter, a lapse driven by fear and denial. He had made a reckless choice, and then, paralyzed by shame, he buried it. When he finished speaking, the room fell into a silence thicker than the rain outside. "You didn't trust me to handle the truth?" Cookie finally asked, her voice shaking but firm. Magic tried to answer, but the words faltered. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "Protecting us." But she didn't want protection. She wanted partnership. And in that moment, she saw not the man the world adored, but the one who had chosen silence over truth. Again. "You made that decision alone," she said. "And you let me stand next to you on that stage, thinking I knew everything. You let me believe that what we were facing together." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "You didn't just lie," she continued. "You let me build a life with half the story." The days that followed were fragile. Cookie withdrew. She kept busy with the baby, made excuses for dinners, took long walks alone. Magic tried to close the gap, but words now felt small. What haunted her wasn't just the betrayal. It was the erosion of something sacred, their trust. They had survived so much already, the diagnosis, the media storm, the unknowns, but now the betrayal came from within. She thought back to the early days of their marriage, to the promises made. She had always known life with Magic would be different, complicated, magnified, but she had believed in their core, and now that belief was crumbling. One weekend, they retreated to a quiet cabin on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a last attempt to find clarity. Magic suggested it. Cookie agreed, but with distance. It was there, in that solitude, that the breaking point arrived. She stood by the window, watching the sun rise when Magic approached, his voice raw. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, "but I see now. I was just scared. Of losing you, of being less in your eyes." Cookie turned, tears in her own. "You were never less," she said, "but now I don't know who you are." He dropped to his knees, arms at his sides, stripped of everything but truth. "I'm asking you, don't walk away." She didn't answer right away. Her silence held history, pain, and the weight of every choice he'd made without her. Finally, she spoke. "I won't walk away," she said, "but we start from zero, no more lies, not even to protect me." And that was the promise, not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but a chance to rebuild, only if honesty would finally become their foundation. In the years that followed their breaking point, Magic and Cookie began again, cautiously, deliberately. The wounds hadn't vanished, but they had scabbed over, covered by something more durable: transparency. Then, in 1996, whispers started circulating. Magic was considering a return to the NBA. To fans, it was thrilling news. The legend was back. To Cookie, it raised deeper questions. One night, she asked directly, "Is this about finishing what you started, or is it about escaping the guilt you still carry?" Magic paused, caught off guard by the precision of her words. "I miss the game," he said, "but I miss who I was before all of this too." Cookie didn't smile. "Then be honest with yourself first. Because if this is about proving something, it won't work." He nodded, but the truth was still forming inside him. As he returned to the court in January 1996, the cheers were thunderous. His teammates welcomed him, the fans celebrated, and for a brief moment it felt like old times. But something had changed. He wasn't just older, he was different. The burden he carried couldn't be dribbled away. That season he played 32 games, and when it ended, so did his professional career, and for good. But the real turning point wasn't on the court. It came in a room full of reporters where Magic decided to open a new chapter, one he had avoided for too long. He stood before them, not as the polished star of the 80s, but as a man who had made mistakes, who had hurt people, and who was finally ready to say it aloud. He admitted to past affairs, acknowledged the ways he had failed Cookie, and the ways he had failed himself. "I was reckless," he said. "I was afraid. And for a long time I thought I could bury that fear in work, in appearances, in a return to the game. But I've learned the only way out is through." Cookie watched from the sidelines, her face unreadable. When asked for comment, she simply said, "It's not courage if it doesn't cost you something. Today cost him something." Her words resonated far beyond the press room. People began to see the Johnsons not as a power couple, but as survivors of illness, of betrayal, of the slow, painful path back to each other. Later that year, the couple was invited to a televised interview, one where Cookie, for the first time, would speak in detail about what those early years had really been like. She didn't hold back. She spoke of fear, not just for Magic's life, but for her own mental survival. She spoke of anger at the lies, at the loneliness of being praised for loyalty while privately drowning in betrayal. And she spoke of love, the kind that demands truth, not perfection. "I stayed," she said, "not because I was weak, but because I was willing to demand more from him and from myself. I stayed because he finally gave me the real version of who he was." The audience was stunned. The applause wasn't for drama, it was for the depth of honesty. From that moment on, Magic and Cookie redefined what it meant to be public figures. They weren't just faces of HIV awareness. They became symbols of radical honesty, of rebuilding not just a marriage, but a man's sense of self. And for the first time in years, Cookie smiled. Not the polite, composed smile for the cameras, but one born from peace. Time passed, and with it, the weight of the past began to shift. Not disappear, never disappear, but evolve. What once felt like scars became reminders of growth, not wounds to hide. Magic and Cookie Johnson did what few public couples manage. They rebuilt, not for the cameras, not for the narrative, but for each other. Their marriage, once frayed and uncertain, became a partnership grounded in truth. Every conversation was clearer, every silence now understood. They poured themselves into the causes that mattered most. Magic expanded his work in HIV awareness, focusing not just on health but on dignity. Cookie launched initiatives for women and families affected by the virus, creating spaces for voices like hers. the ones often forgotten in the noise. Their foundation grew, their impact multiplied, but their greatest legacy wasn't built in stadiums or press rooms. It was in quiet, consistent love. Magic often reflected on that. During interviews, at fundraisers, even in passing conversations, he would mention Cookie. Not just as his wife, but as the person who refused to accept the edited version of his truth. "She didn't just stay," he once said. "She demanded that I grow, and I did, because of her." They became symbols of endurance, not perfection, endurance. The kind of resilience that doesn't come from strength alone, but from accountability. Years later, in a televised tribute honoring his contributions on and off the court, Magic stood before a packed room of peers, athletes, celebrities, and activists. When he took the microphone, he didn't speak about basketball. He spoke about healing. "I didn't lose my career," he said. "I almost lost the only person who ever saw me," and stayed. The room stood in silence. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Cookie. She smiled, small and soft, and he smiled back. That moment said more than any speech could. Together, they built something unshakable. A love that had been tested, cracked, mended, not hidden behind perfection, but celebrated through transparency. They showed the world that forgiveness isn't passive, it's a choice, renewed every day. Their story reached far beyond the sports world. People who had never watched a single Lakers game found strength in their journey. Couples found courage to speak truths long buried. Families found language for pain once unspeakable. Magic and Cookie became more than icons. They became human, and in that humanity, they became legends in a different way. They continued their work in communities across the country. HIV testing clinics, educational programs, mentorship for young people growing up without guidance. They made space for others to be seen. And in the quiet moments, the ones no camera caught, they laughed. They held hands. They watched their grandchildren play in the backyard. Life was no longer about redemption. It was about living fully in the truth they had fought to uncover. Their journey wasn't easy, but it was real, and that's what made it powerful. And if this story moved you, subscribe now for more real stories behind the headlines. And don't miss the next video waiting for you right here. It's another moment that changed sports and lives forever.